So when they say that our precious human life is precious and the circumstances can change at any moment, that's really very true. I received news today of a friend of mine, an acquaintance more, who was quite healthy, had a massive stroke a few days ago, and is now completely paralyzed, will never walk again, will never talk again, and never understand again. And it happened like that. So we feel quite permanent and secure, but we should remember that he did as well. And then all this happened quite suddenly, and his wife is just completely, her whole life now is topsy-turvy. Okay, so we have to remember that things can change very quickly. We shouldn't take our good fortune for granted, and instead we should really use our energy in the Dharma and not waste it getting annoyed at petty things or having our feelings hurt with small things, but to really put our energy instead into transforming this mind of ours, so that when death comes or when injury comes, we will have some merit that will accompany this mind stream. And the best way to create merit is generating the bodhicitta and then doing all of our actions with the bodhicitta motivation. And again, to have bodhicitta, we can't be stuck in our own little things. We have to have a very big, expansive mind that takes all sentient beings into account and really sees broadly and vastly and includes everybody, and is willing to work for the benefit of all beings. So we have to keep that in mind and keep our heart open, not letting things get tight with the self-centered thought. And so with that bodhicitta motivation, then let's listen to the teachings this evening. So I find this kind of way of thinking very helpful, just how suddenly something like this happened to somebody who was previously healthy, and now how it is irreversible and no chance to go back and redo things in his life, and his wife's life, completely changed now too. And then you think how, this is our situation as well, and yet how we can waste so much time on such incredibly petty, stupid things, And when we see our mind acting like that and getting stuck in these petty things, so-and-so did this to, didn't look at me properly, so-and-so, spoke one sentence with a harsh voice to me, so-and-so, this and that, I didn't get what I want, the food was too hot, the food was too cold, my bed wasn't right, I'm attracted to this person, they don't want to have anything to do with me. All this kind of stuff. It's like, for what purpose, for what sense are we spending our time worrying about stupid agios, you know? And yet most of the day, this is what's going on. Yeah? Small, small things, you know, and we get extremely offended, extremely insulted. You know, we feel like everybody's responsible for our problems, and even if they aren't, they should fix our problems. You know, and our problems are like this big because they're all manufactured in our own mind. Yeah. I mean, if we were starving, you know, then okay. You know? But if you look at it, most of our problems, we have much more mental suffering than physical suffering, don't we? We have the luxury of having mental suffering. So our mind just goes to it and makes up all sorts of things. You know? And we sit there, or, and for what? For what? What are we trying to prove? What are we trying to get? Yeah? I mean, we already have everything that you need in having a precious human life. So what in the world are we, you know, letting our mind do? Creating so many stupid agios. Yeah? Because the thing is, when we get a stroke, or we get a heart attack, or we get in an accident, yeah, it's gone. The chance is gone. No more opportunity to practice. Yeah? Then even if you have some intelligence left, you look back on your life, and what is there? No, I cried today, I cried there, I got mad at this person then, I got mad at that person, I was jealous of this person, jealous of that. You know, that's all we have to look back with in our whole life. It's a bunch of stupid things. Yeah? So, I think it's very good to, you know, to keep this in mind. And, you know, this is, we always talk about mindfulness, 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 you know, introspective alertness, introspective awareness. This is what it means. Mindfulness of what's important. Yeah? Introspective alertness, that's asking ourselves, you know, and observing, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? And then, you know, if our mind is not in line with the Dharma, yeah, then to try and get it there as soon as possible. Yeah? So if we see we're wallowing in self-pity, or even somebody apologized to us, we're not going to accept their apology, we're going to stay hurt, you know, until they come groveling on the floor up to us to apologize. Yeah? For what? Okay? So, you know, to keep mindfulness of what is virtuous, not mindfulness of what is non-virtuous. Yeah? You don't sit there and meditate on, you know, when you're thinking of somebody else's body, it's not, oh, their skin is so beautiful, eyes are like diamonds, teeth are like pearls, oh, this person's so wonderful. For what? What's that going to do you? Good is that going to do you, you know? If you're a sincere Dharma practitioner. That's just a lot of, you know, distraction rubbish, isn't it? So I think we have to, you know, focus on what's important and not waste our time. And not waste other people's time with our nonsense too. Yeah, because we can waste other people's time. Yeah, calling up our friends, oh, this happened, oh, that happened. You know? then everybody gets upset, everybody gets this, then everybody starts talking about this and that, and all it is our own drama. Yeah? And so that kind of mind, there's absolutely no way that mind can have bodhicitta. Absolutely no way. You know, you think you can hold on to your own personal dramas and have bodhicitta at the same time? Forget it. Yeah? Because our own personal dramas are like this. Yeah? And bodhicitta is like this. And when we're involved in our own personal dramas, there is no space in our mind for anybody else. Because it's all about me and my hurt feelings, and I got insulted, and they didn't treat me right, and they did this, and they blame me, and they, you know, so narrow, isn't it, when we look at it? So narrow. Just my life. Yeah? So how can that mind have bodhicitta? Yeah? It can't think beyond its own nose. Can it? It's all, you know, me. Yeah? So, you know, if we're really sincere about having bodhicitta, we better drop a lot of that nonsense, you know? And drop it as if it were a burning hot iron in our hand, you know? So you had burning hot iron, you're not going to sit there and go, oh, this is so nice, look how pretty and hot it is. You know, you're going to go, ah! You know, because it's hurting. So we have to realize that, you know, our nonsense mind is hurting us. And then drop it. Okay. So we were on verse 205 last time. Remember? That space and so forth are permanent is the conception of common beings. For the wise, they are not objects perceived, even by conventional valid cognizers. Okay? So, you know, these schools, when they are saying permanent, they're also meaning true existence. Yeah. So, Aryadeva is saying to them that not understanding that the term space is designated to a mere absence of obstructive contact, common people think that uncompounded space, etc., are permanent functional phenomena. Okay? So uncompounded space is permanent. It's not a functional phenomena, because functional phenomena and permanent are what's the word? Dichotomy? Not a dichotomy. Well, yes, they are a dichotomy.
Mutually.
Yeah, they are a dichotomy. And mutually exclusive, that's the word. Mutually exclusive. Okay, so those who are wise concerning the emptiness of functional phenomena don't think they ultimately exist. In other words, don't hold on to permanent things as truly existent. And they also don't regard permanent functional phenomena as objects perceived by conventional, reliable cognizers. Because there is no such thing as a permanent functional phenomena. So it's impossible for a conventional, reliable cognizer to know it. And it doesn't exist ultimately either. Yeah. So a cognizer that knows the ultimate truth is certainly not going to perceive that. So we're really insisting that only that which does not change momentarily is permanent. not other functional phenomena. Okay,
not other functional phenomena?
Not functional phenomena. Okay? Then 206, a single direction is not present wherever there is that which has directions. That with directions, therefore, clearly also has other directional parts. So here we are back to partless particles. Yeah? Now, I don't know about you. Did any of you believe in partless particles before? You know, somehow I think through just, growing up with the little bit of science we all learned in school, it's impossible to think that there's partless particles. Because you see even the tiny atoms, there's things going around in them, and of course if you have a nucleus and something going around it, it's going to have sides, it's going to have directions, it's going to have parts, so maybe due to some of our scientific background we don't hold on to that idea so much, although some scientists may. I don't know if they would say a partless particle. They might say the smallest particle, but then a smallest particle you would kind of have to say it was partless, because even if it were very small, if you could divide it in two, then it would have two parts. Yeah, so actually if you're looking for the smallest particle, you would have to say it's partless. Yeah, wouldn't you? Because even if it's very small, you could divide it in half. So you have a top half and a bottom half. It has parts. And you divide those, and you divide those, and you divide those. And then you're trying to find something that you can't divide. Yeah, maybe you can't divide it physically, but certainly mentally you could divide something into parts. Huh? Okay. So this verse is specifically refuting permanent, omnipresent space. Okay. So there's some people who say space is permanent because it's omnipresent. Okay, whatever is impermanent, like a pot, is not omnipresent. So they're thinking that omnipresent is the same thing as permanent. Okay, so space is everywhere, therefore it's permanent, therefore it doesn't have any parts. Okay, so we're going to refute permanence by refuting omnipresent. So it's contradictory to assert space is omnipresent but partless. Okay, because the space where the cup is and the space where the bell is are two different spaces. Okay, so you can't say that it has no parts. Yeah, space may be permanent, but still conceptually we can divide it into parts. Yeah, the part where the cup is, where the phone is, where the bell is, where, the body is, whatever. Okay? So if space didn't have any parts, then everything would all be located in the same place. Yeah? So these people say that space is an ultimate truth because it can bear analysis, because even when reduced through the process of analysis, it can still generate an apprehension of itself. Remember when we were talking about the Vaivasikas, how they defined an ultimate truth, something that even if conceptually divided, it's still present. Okay, so they say that about space. Yeah, so therefore they say it's an ultimate truth. Yeah. Whereas, like for the Prasangika, ultimate truth is talking about the ultimate nature, how things really exist. It's not talking about the ultimate building blocks of the universe or anything like that. Okay? So this school says other examples of ultimate truths are partless particles, okay, because you can't divide them, and okay, and partless moments of time, because you get to the smallest moment of time and it has no parts. So that's the ultimate unit of time. Okay, so the belief that ultimate truths are permanent functional phenomena is not, satisfactory to somebody who's really thinking properly. Okay? Okay, now we're going to go, so that was somebody saying space is an ultimate truth and a permanent functional phenomena and can't be divided into smaller parts. Now we're going to get verse 207 is saying that time is a permanent, refuting permanent time. Yeah. And so, you think about this, now how could somebody believe, what would permanent time look like? And because you want to try and understand their assertions, where they're coming from. The most I can think of, maybe some of you have some ideas, is that since time is always present, they say it's permanent. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all. Yeah, time, like they say space is always there, so it's permanent. Time is always there, so it's permanent. Okay, so this is an assertion of the Vedantikas. Okay. So they say that since permanent time exists, the beginning and growth of things are seen. But that's interesting, isn't it? Because we would say it's because time is impermanent that the beginning and growth of things are seen. They say the opposite, okay? And they say because in winter, although other conditions are present, growth stops. So it's only time that makes things grow, because the time in winter, it won't grow. So we can therefore infer existence of time, which is permanent, because it doesn't depend on a cause. What? Yes, that's what I said too. I have a hard time understanding exactly what their assertion is, okay? But it's something about, time is permanent. Yeah, and because time is permanent, things can grow. Maybe because they exist in time and time is omnipresent. I'm really not sure. But these people also think that time is a cause, but it's not an effect. So they say it's permanent. It also acts as a cause. Because, springtime and summer, those times act as the causes for things to grow. But time is permanent. Maybe what they mean by permanent is like truly existent. Yeah, that could be too.
Or even eternal.
Yeah, or eternal. Okay, but yeah, because time is eternal, like omnipresent time, it's always there. Therefore, things can happen. But they say time is a cause, but it's not an effect. Yeah? And so then we respond and say, well, then it follows that sprouts, for example, are constantly produced, and there's never a time when they aren't produced because they're produced by a permanent cause. So if the cause does not go out of existence when the result exists, then that cause can keep producing. Now think about that. Does that make any sense? Yeah. Because we all know that when an effect has arisen, the cause is no longer there. Yeah, the cause and effect cannot exist at the same time. But somehow they're saying because time is permanent, Yeah, it can exist with the effect. But then we say, but then it would keep producing again and again and again because the cause hasn't gone out of existence. Okay. I was just thinking about that. You know, we have this slogan, you want to have your cake and eat it too. That mind state is this thing, isn't it? You know, time is permanent, so I can have the cake and I can eat it and it won't go out of existence. Yeah?
Where do you buy that?
Yeah. But I mean, that's kind of when our mind gets like that. I want to eat my cake and have it too. It's like we're asserting this permanent time, and time's a cause, and or something's a cause, and it's not an effect, and the effect can exist. I mean, the cause and effect can exist at the same time. So that's good news. You can keep eating your cake and keep eating your cake, and there's more cake that constantly appears because the cause of the cake is permanent.
But then there's constantly poop that appears too.
Yes, isn't there? Then your poop is permanent. Okay. So then these people. Okay. So in response, then these Vedantins say, well, their production depends on other factors. Now, how can you say it's permanent if it depends on other factors? Okay. So then we respond, well, then it follows that time must be an effect. Yeah, because the intermittent production of sprouts is governed by other factors. So if time is not the only cause that's producing a sprout, if there are other causes and conditions in there, then, you know, like heat and water and, you know, things like that, then, you know, time depends on these other conditions, and something that depends on other causes, yeah, cannot be permanent.
It's an interesting idea because, I mean, to try to wrap your mind around it in the sense of imagining if time wasn't there.
If time wasn't there, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like this time is omnipresent.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually not in the equation, but if it wasn't there, then these things couldn't happen either. So it's like a condition. It's really kind of
it's a condition. It has to be there, you know, for causes to arise. I mean, results to arise. Yeah.
You know, but every time we talk about permanent, I have to really, because if it's permanent, nothing moves.
Exactly.
It's frozen.
Yep.
But my mind has difficulty with that.
Yeah.
For me, it's permanent. It can move. It can be alive. But it doesn't die.
Yeah.
You know?
But that's because you're thinking of the Western definition of permanent.
Yeah.
So we have to keep coming back to what the Buddhist definition of permanent is. It means static. Or we could say unchanging. Yeah, maybe unchanging is better.
Their definition of permanent could be...
Their definition of permanent, I can't understand.
Yeah, maybe they have...
Yeah. I don't know. Okay. So it says we don't assert that time is non-existent because it says the actions of the embodied do not go to waste even in 100 eons. When conditions assemble and the time is ripe, their fruit will mature. So that's talking about the ripening of karma. So that verse is showing, yes, we believe karma, you know, time exists. But, you know, how can it be frozen? It can't be. No. So according to the Vedantikas, a sprout not arising during certain periods when the conditions for its arising seem to be present illustrates it's dependent on time. So I guess they would say like a sprout not arising in the winter, not growing in the winter, shows that it's dependent on time. So time is a cause, since it is the key factor facilitating production.
So no wonder time ceases to exist.
That's what I'm
thinking.
There's no time.
Yeah, I don't know. A facilitating factor is the definition of a cause. Their argument is then used to show that time is an effect because it depends on other factors which help it to produce the sprout. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't help you understand the Vedantikas. Yeah. Okay, 208. Any cause without an effect has no existence as a cause. Therefore, it would follow that causes must be effects. Okay, so here, you know, they keep on saying something is a cause, but it's not. They're saying it's a permanent cause, but it's not an effect. Okay, so if you say time is a cause, you should also accept that it's an effect, because without there being an effect, you can't establish something as being a cause. You know, because cause and effect exist in relationship to each other. So you can't say something is a cause without the potential of it producing an effect. And you can't say something is an effect without it having arisen in reliance upon something else, which we call a cause. Okay? So this is mutual dependence, actually, like long and short, here and there. You know, it's like cause and effect become cause and effect in relationship to each other. And one thing is both a cause and effect, but it's not a cause and effect of the same thing.
Right.
It's the cause of one thing and the effect of another thing. Okay. So because something being a cause depends on there being the possibility of it producing an effect. Since all causes must also be effects, yeah, because to change it must have arisen due to the change in something else. In other words, its nature is impermanent. Okay. You can't accept causes that aren't also effects. Okay. Now, somebody might say, well, what about the last moment of a candle flame before it goes out? Is that an effect but not a cause?
No.
No,
cause.
smoke still comes
Smoke
out.
would come up.
Yeah,
Other things,
yeah, smoke comes, heat comes.
stuff.
Yeah, other things would come even after, you know, the last moment of that flame. Okay. If something has an effect and the effect facilitates it being established as a cause, in other words, because there's an effect, that enables you to establish something else as a cause, then that cause too must be an effect. Okay? It's an effect because because that cause cannot come into existence without depending on something else. Okay? So for that reason, you cannot establish an original cause. Okay? You can't establish an original cause of anything, you know. Then you say, well, can you establish an end to some things? Yes, you can, because if you can eliminate the causes of something completely so that they no longer exist, then, yeah, you can stop the continuity of something. And so that's what we're doing when we're trying to eliminate the afflictions. Yeah, is remove the causes so that they can no longer arise.
Well, can you say again what that reason that you can establish is? Can you say it in a...
Okay, since all causes must be effects, because to change Yeah, for a cause to change into an effect means it has to have a nature that is changing or impermanent. So if it has a changing nature, then it must have been produced by other causes. Okay, so therefore, all causes are also, one thing that is a cause is also an effect, but of different things.
Thank you.
Okay.
And then was that a separate kind of reason where it said that if the effect facilitates something being established as a cause, then
Yeah.
what follows?
Yeah.
And what was the next part?
Oh, okay. Where was that? Something has an effect, and the effect facilitates it being established as a cause, then that cause too must be an effect. Okay, so that's what I just explained. Or, if you look at mutual dependence, something being a cause and something being an effect, those two things are dependent on each other. Yeah.
Is that like an example of there's no parent until there's a child, like that?
Yeah. That you don't call somebody a parent until there's a child.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And you don't call somebody a child unless there were parents. Okay. Then, verse 203, when a cause undergoes change, 209, sorry. When a cause undergoes change, it becomes the cause of something else. Okay? So the cause undergoes change to become an effect, which becomes a cause of something else. Anything that undergoes change should not be called permanent. Okay? So this verse is talking about that it's contradictory to say that which undergoes change is permanent. And time changes, doesn't it? I mean, an hour passes, a day passes. Time changes, time is not fixed. Okay, so a cause, for example, a seed acts as the cause of something else. For example, a sprout, because the seed has that potency to produce the sprout. A functional thing that changes so that its former and latter moments are different cannot be permanent. Okay, so don't accept permanent time as a cause. Yeah. Then 210. A thing with a permanent cause is produced by that which has not come into being. In other words, it doesn't exist, okay? Because it's saying a permanent cause is produced by something which has not come into being. So a permanent cause is produced by something that doesn't exist, meaning the permanent cause doesn't exist. Yeah, because you can't produce something from something that doesn't exist. Okay, whatever happens by itself cannot have a cause. Okay, so this is showing that it's contradictory, that something that, if you assert that something can come into existence on its own, by its own accord, under its own power, that thing also has causes. Okay, in other words, if something is independent, it does not have causes. If it comes into existence only depending on itself, on its own power, it does not have causes, meaning that it can't exist. Yeah? Because how can you have a result that came about through a non-existent cause? Yeah. So I remember as a kid when they talked about, God, and it was God's beginningless. But God is also permanent. Yeah. So So I couldn't kind of put that together very well. And if there were first moment to God, then what created God? And, so if God changed when God created things, if he changed, then God must be an effect of something else. So what created God? If God doesn't change when he creates other things, how can he create? Because create involves change. Okay? So if you don't accept that time changes, then it follows that a functional thing like a sprout, whose cause is unchanging permanent time, has arisen of its own accord because it was produced by a cause that hasn't come into being. It's produced by a non-existent cause because time doesn't change. Okay, so, time is permanent, and it is a cause, and a permanent cause, which is not an effect, can't produce an effect, can't come into being. So whatever happens by itself can't have a producing cause, because it's independent and self-existent. And so that actually comes up very often when we start refuting true existence, that if something were truly existent, it couldn't arise. Why? Because true existence means it generates from itself without other causes. Yeah? So something that generates from itself without any other causes, it's with something without causes is permanent. So then if things are truly existent, they would be permanent. Okay, so that comes again and again when we start to refute things. So like if the self were truly existent and existed all by its own without being produced by causes and was just there, independent of everything else, then it would have to be permanent. If the self were permanent, then you would never change. Do you change? Yes. Okay, so therefore things can't, be truly existent.
Is it silly to even bring up the congruent potentiality of, time producing a sprout? I mean,
What do you mean?
The substantial cause, looking at the substantial cause of something that has to be able to produce the kind of effect. The whole argument seems just silly.
Yeah. Well, they're saying time is they would have to say time is a condition, not the substantial cause.
Yeah.
It's a condition producing something. Yeah. And they would say it's a condition producing something, it's a cause, because something doesn't grow in winter and it does grow in summer. But then how can you say that time is permanent if that's the case? Yeah, well, time's permanent because it's always there. But if you look, time is always there, but one moment of time is not always there. Yeah, so this is the whole thing with space. Space is always there, but space has parts, and time has parts. Yeah. So I think this is, partly this whole thing of, you can keep dividing it, but it still is what it is.
It seems like like an egg, like the shell, that doesn't move, it's permanent, and inside it can move.
Doesn't make sense, does it? Yeah. Okay, 211. How can that which is produced by a permanent thing be impermanent? Good question. Never are the two, cause and effect, seen to have incompatible characteristics. Okay, so this is saying that it's contradictory to say that something that has arisen from a permanent cause is impermanent. So the cause is permanent, it produces a result without changing, and then that result is impermanent. Huh? Okay? So if you say that things are produced by permanent causes, then functional things like sprouts can't be impermanent. Okay? Because it's produced by a permanent cause, and the cause and effect have to have, some concordant qualities. Something that's permanent can't produce something that's impermanent. Something that's impermanent can't produce something that's permanent. Okay? So this is so because cause and effect always have similar characteristics. It can't be that one is permanent and the other is impermanent. Okay, so again, the idea of a permanent creator that creates impermanent things doesn't hold water, or the idea of a permanent cosmic substance out of which all the impermanent things arise also doesn't work. Some people talk about, there's some ethereal cosmic substance that's permanent. Yeah, and because people, this idea of permanence, because impermanent so often in our life means it changes, it goes away, it disappears, so it's associated with dukkha. Yeah, so people want something that's more steady and reliable, that's not going to just, go out of existence like that. Okay, 212. That of which, here are dear partless particles again, and they're permanent particles. That of which some sides are causes, while other sides are not, is thereby multifarious, meaning it has many different parts. How can that which is multifarious be permanent? So it's refuting permanent particles. Yeah, so something that has parts cannot be a permanent functional thing. So the Vaisesikas, they're a non-Buddhist school, they say that there's the permanent particles of the four elements that are activated by the force of karma, and they form the substantial entity of a composite producing the environment, and so on. So you have permanent particles that don't have parts that come together and form the paper clip and the clock and the cloth and everything else. That's impressive, isn't it?
We live in an interesting universe.
Yeah. Okay. So we say no, because it follows that when particles come together to form a composite, an increase in size wouldn't occur because the particles totally interpenetrate. So if you have partless particles, okay, that means that things that are partless cannot come together on one side and create a bigger mass, because then one side they would have sides, they would have parts. This side and that side, because one part joined to the other side of this side, okay? So if they were totally partless, they would completely merge and occupy the same space. So then how would you get an increase in mass if things were partless?
How can you get a particle without part?
Yeah.
There's already a part there.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're going into, that it's got to have parts.
But if it's there, it does.
Yeah. So, okay. So if some parts, so then these people say, well, maybe, some part of it overlaps with the other one. So it's, it's still kind of partless. Okay? So if some parts coalesce, they are causes, while that which don't aren't causes. So then the smallest particles must have parts, because some of its sides are causes, and while other of its sides are not causes. That's the refutation of partless particles. Okay? Because if one side overlaps with the other and interpenetrates, but not the whole thing does, then you could still say, well, there's an increase in mass. But then, your partless particle has to have parts, because one part interpenetrated with the other one, and the other part of your partless particle didn't interpenetrate. Okay, so smallest partless particles must have parts, because some of its sides are causes why others aren't. Okay, so having parts, it cannot be a permanent functional phenomena. Yeah, so here it's using the fact that something has parts to refute it being a permanent functional phenomena. Okay. So we're emphasizing that not only does it have parts, but it has diverse parts. Okay, so if something has parts, is it necessarily impermanent?
No, because space has parts.
Right. Yeah, no, because space has parts. Okay. If something has parts, is it necessarily not a functional phenomena? No, is it necessarily, what did I say before? If it has parts, is it necessarily impermanent? Yeah, so if it has parts, is it necessarily not a functional phenomena? Or is it necessarily a functional phenomena, either one of those? No, it could be either. Something with parts could be a functional phenomena, or it can be, something that's not a functional phenomena. So it seems to me that having parts, having parts itself does not negate its being permanent, nor does it negate it being a functional phenomena, but somehow it negates it being a permanent functional phenomena. Now, how does that fit together? Because it has parts, it can't be a permanent functional phenomena.
It can't.
Yeah. They're using that as a reason.
Because it can't function.
No, if it has parts, it can't be a Well, actually,
But it can't function.
yeah, actually, we can't even say it can't be a permanent functional phenomena, because a permanent functional phenomena doesn't exist. Yeah. It just plain old doesn't exist.
But having parts is then supposed to refute the existence of such a thing?
Yeah. So that's what I'm wondering about. How does that refute the existence of phenomena? Yeah. If having parts refutes the existence of partless particles, which are permanent functional phenomena, according to some people. So maybe the argument should be, having parts refutes partless particles, and if you can't assert anything that is a permanent functional phenomena, then you cannot say permanent functional phenomena exist. So it's refuting, one of the mainstays of permanent functional phenomena, which is partless particles. Yeah, it must be like that.
So how can that which is multifarious be permanent? So that seems like it is saying that parts need to be permanent.
What does multifarious mean?
Having parts. Yeah, but here it's specifically refuting refuting partless particles. It's not refuting space. So I think we have to take it within the context of what the verse is speaking about specifically. Okay, then to continue with our friends, the permanent functional phenomena, verse 2:13, the cause which is spherical is not present in the effect. Thus, complete interpenetration of particles is not feasible. Okay, so the unfeasibility of an accretion, a collection, which is a separate substantial entity forming through the coalescence of homogeneous particles. In other words, if you have partless particles, they can't all come together and make something bigger. Okay? So Joe Blow is saying, though particles interpenetrate completely because they're partless, so he's really hanging on to the idea of partless. They really interpenetrate because they are partless. Still, a separate accretion of coalesced particle forms can produce the composite. So even though they all merge and interpenetrate and take up the same space, you still can have a larger thing.
I don't think so.
By imputation.
I don't get it. Okay. So then we say, then particles couldn't interpenetrate completely when composites form, because if they did, there wouldn't be an increase in size. Okay. Also, the cause, because these partless particles are spherical.
So how can they be
partless?
Well, if they're partless, but okay.
Okay. So also the cause, which is spherical, with the characteristic of appearing to the mind as partless and spherical, is not present in the resultant substantial entity, the composite, because the composite isn't spherical. So if you had these spherical partless particles, which first of all, how can it be spherical and also be partless? Yeah. How could they combine together to make things that are rectangles?
Did change shape.
Yeah, they do. Okay. Should we do another verse? Okay. 14. What'd you say?
Okay.
Okay, yes. One particle's position is not asserted as also that of another. This, it is not asserted that cause and effect are the same size. Okay. So one particle's position is not asserted to be the position of another. So even though they are partless, they don't occupy the same space. Thus, it's not asserted that cause and effect are the same size. Okay. So this is the contradictoriness of asserting that particles do not interpenetrate completely. That's contradictory. When complete interpenetration doesn't occur, one particle's position is not asserted to be the position of another particle. In other words, they occupy two different places. Thus, the causal particles and the resultant composite aren't equal in size.
That's how things can get bigger then.
When complete interpenetration doesn't occur, one particle's position isn't asserted to be the position of another particle. Thus, the causal particles and the resultant composite aren't equal in size. Okay? Because the separate causal particles would be bigger. But it just said when complete it's saying, here he's going back to there's incomplete interpenetration. So that's how you get the increase in size. Okay? Yeah. Okay. Thus, there's the absurd consequence that the composite isn't an object of the senses, is avoided. So that, they're trying desperately to say there's particles. Nevertheless, since particles have parts, they still can't be permanent functional things. Okay, because their assertion of permanent functional phenomena is based on their being truly existent. So permanent functional phenomena are truly existent, and truly existent things don't depend on or have parts. So I think that's the point all of this is trying to get at. Okay, that it can't be a permanent functional phenomena that truly exists in and of itself. Yeah. But it can't be permanent and truly exist, and it also can't be a functional phenomenon and truly exist. Okay, 215. Whatever has an eastern side also has an eastern part. Those whose particles have sides admit that they are not partless particles. Okay, so this is refuting that particles are partless prior to the formation of a composite. So Joblo says their having parts occurs when the resultant substantial entity is forming, but prior to that the smallest particles don't have parts. So prior to coming together, these partless particles don't have parts, but as soon as they come together they magically have parts. I don't get it. Okay, well, thank goodness. It says incorrect. If it has sides, it must have parts. If something has an eastern side, it has an eastern part. If you say the particles have sides prior to the formation of a composite, then those particles aren't partless because they're located in the different directions. Okay? And if you say they didn't have parts and then suddenly had parts when they came together, how in the world did that happen?
And if it has an eastern side, then it must have a western side also.
Right. You want to keep going?
These are funny.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few more verses on partless particles. And then there's some things that really don't make sense. At least to me. Ding dong. Okay. Yeah, let's finish this chapter. So 216. The front takes up, the back relinquishes. Whatever does not have both of these motions is not something which moves. So this is talking about that it's contradictory to say that particles form composites when movement from one position to another is impossible for partless particles. Because when something moves, okay, the front takes up space and the back of it relinquishes space. So in order to move, it must have parts, because one part goes forward and the other part gives up the space. Okay? So how could you say that particles that were partless could come together to make composites because they can't move?
Well, that's a theory.
Yeah. Okay, so such particles could not move from one place to another. When something moves, its front takes up its position ahead and its rear relinquishes the position behind. But partless particles neither take up nor relinquish a position because they have no front or back. Okay, and also something without parts couldn't have a location. So how could it move in the first place? And if you say that they don't move, then how could you form a substantial entity? How could you form a substantial entity of the composite? So don't accept partless particles.
No problem.
No problem. 217, that which does not have a front or any middle, and which does not have a rear, being invisible, who will see it? Okay, so now Joblo is saying permanent particles exist because yogis perceive them with their divine eye. And the divine eye enables the perception of subtle forms. So it does exist because it's perceived by the reliable cognizer of a yogic awareness. And the answer is, what yogi sees such things? This isn't possible because a particle that has no front, middle, or rear isn't evident to any perceiver. It's like, and the same thing goes if you assert that there's a smallest moment of time. Because if there's a smallest moment of time, then it doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. So if it doesn't have a beginning, then it can't have something prior to it. And if it doesn't have an end, it can't have something after it. Maybe that's why they say time is permanent, you know? But because no matter what duration of time, you can always, you know, it has a beginning part and a middle part and an end part, then, you know, time also has parts, you know? And those parts are changing. Okay. Maybe we should stop here. Wait till next time. Where did my partless?
So Aryadeva is spending this time refuting the schools. That's what the whole point is?
Yeah, because apparently at his time there were schools that asserted, you know, partless particles, partless moments of time, yeah, permanent time, yeah, partless space, yeah. There were all those kind of assertions. And we're kind of laughing, but that's because we've done some study beforehand. You know, if somebody came in here and taught you about, you know, there's permanent time. Time always exists. It doesn't change. Time is always there. It's permanent. It doesn't change. There is no cause to time. You know, somebody could make up all sorts of things and we'd believe them. Yeah? Geshe Sonam mentioned whenever we would make faces at some of these beliefs, he said, don't do that. If these people came in the room, I'm sure they could convince you that these things exist.
Didn't you learn from Guy that the Vaibhashika view came from meditators kind of observing phenomena at the smallest level they could see? Yeah, and that then they sort of theorized it based on that. So this yogic perceiver claim actually makes sense in that light.
In that light, or it could, but I think, you know, if your yogic direct perceiver goes deep enough, of course you see those things don't exist. But this all comes from the Abhidhammikas, and those people a lot of them were theoretical, trying to put different ideas and different sutras together and see how they related to each other. So, yeah. I'm not sure how much comes from meditation, because they really come up with some strange beliefs that I don't think a person who was, you know, deeply meditating would have. But on the other hand, you could see in the West, for example, people were looking for the smallest particles that compose matter. Aren't they? Everybody's looking for and they're still looking for the smallest particles. Yeah? So in that way, you know, I mean, these are people with PhDs who are looking for the smallest particles.
Well, until you think it through, it doesn't come up not to. I mean, like when I first moved here, I remember being in the kitchen and thinking, well, of course God's permanent. And then He created all these things that made, like, why not? But we've never gone through all these arguments, and then you kind of see, wow, it's not possible.
Yeah.
So, you know, unless you've ever done that, you just be looking for this smaller and smaller things.
Right.
Rather to think.
Use logic.
Yeah.
It also depends on your definition of the word permanent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much. Okay. So this hopefully should get us thinking about things being impermanent. Yeah? And how impermanence never takes a break. Yeah, we like to say, oh, everything's impermanent, but it's also kind of permanent too. Yeah. But again, you know, I mean, our ordinary view, you know, yeah, things change over time, but I'm the same person as I was yesterday. You know, until you really think about it, how can you possibly be the same person you were yesterday? Yeah, it's impossible that we are. And yet we feel like we are. We say we are. But it's actually impossible. Oh, I have one more thing. Are they still online? Okay, and on the telephone, we now have optical fiber optics. Okay, we have fiber optics. So if you are listening on the phone because you got fed up with the streaming that was happening, it's going to be a lot better if you try again. So try again because we now have fiber optics. Yay!